Theology by the book live. We're doing, I forget, did I mirror it? You can't read it anyway. It doesn't matter. Parenting by God's Promises, Joe R. Beeke. This is the last one. We're finishing the book. Kind of hard to believe. So, and I think we've done a pretty good job of not quoting too much of the book. Just to everybody, this is for our church. If you're just joining us, this is let's get our names up here. This is Wes Mabry, John Black. What's down there now? Let's see. There we go. There are names. And so Wes goes to our church. I go to our church. I'm the pastor. He's a respiratory therapist. And so we're doing this book with some people in the church. We're going to start a new book maybe next week. And it's J.C. Ryle's, what was it, Thoughts for Young Men? Is that the name of it? And it's really very good. So we'll go through that and we'll figure, we can read word for word if we want to with it, but I wouldn't want to do that necessarily. But then we're going to do this during the day, probably on we'll know by next week when we'll try to do it during lunchtime, keeping it about 25 minutes or under maybe. We'll see how that works for people. And the idea being people would maybe even join us on what we're doing or send some questions or something. They can even text if they want to. So tonight, being the last one, the topic is children in the church. And you have children.
Yes, I do.
And you bring them to church.
In the church.
They're in the church in worship. So I think that, the topic that he's been talking about is, parenting by God's promises. God has promised certain things to our children, and we are, to trust in God's. Basically, they're God's children. We're raising them up in a church with the means of grace. There's preaching, there's teaching, there's prayer, and then our homes are in the reading of the word and the preaching of the word. Then our homes are like, I don't remember who it was, probably Luther or somebody like that. That you're the little churches. Like the father is the priest in the home, so you're making use of the means of grace. In your home, in your household. If you're by yourself, you read the word, you pray, you do these things. If you're married and it's just you and your wife, you do this together. And particularly, anyway, I'll get sidetracked. But with your children, and this is what he's talking about now, is if you think of family worship, and some people just use the phrase family devotions, and that's fine. But the idea of family, if you just think about it as family worship, even if all you do is you just read the Bible and you pray, that's family worship. But then you can add elements to it. You can have a call to worship if you want to. There are books that kind of just tell you what to do, and you can go through it. And then there's songs to sing. And so we've been doing a thing in our church where we put a song that we are going to sing in the next worship service in the bulletin so families can go through it together, which I've messed up the last 2 Sundays in a row and have not put that song in the order. I'm like, how does this happen? So it'll never happen again, most likely. So anyway, so this is all about how do you, including children in the worship of the church. And all I'm trying to say is, and I think that begins by preparing your children for worship at home. So if you have children who are prepared for worship, and then you bring them to church, and this is not something foreign to them that they only do once a week, and that you are training them to worship. In my favorite book title, and it's not a bad book, it's a pretty good book, it's called Parenting in the Pews. And so that's what we're trying to do, is parent in the pew. So you're, rather than just distracting your child or keeping their attention on something, you're trying to get them to focus their attention on the worship. You're trying to get them, training them to worship. But you can't do that with every age child, and at whatever age you still have to do it at different appropriate levels. But it's just the idea. My idea is we're bringing our children to church to worship, and they are to participate in worship to the best of their abilities, like the rest of us, and their abilities are different than ours. Would you want to add anything to that, or comment?
Well, we baptize our children. They're part of the church, and so it's important to include them in such. And what we found as Judah's gotten older is, by implementing family worship in our home, it definitely rolls over to Sunday mornings. I mean, he's still just turned 5, so you can't expect him to participate in all matters. He's not going to take notes on the sermon, but there's songs he's starting to know in church, and he's not just learning those from church. He's learning those from practicing with family worship. He's learning the Lord's Prayer at home, which then he can participate in at church. He does a doxology every week at home. He does it at church. And so it's a lot of repetition. It's stuff that does roll over. Very age dependent, obviously. But what a blessing, because they're part of the church. We're going to get into this pretty early on, but it's pretty monumental, I'd say. Yeah. And it takes 10 minutes, people. I mean, it literally takes 10, 15 minutes, especially with younger children. You don't have much longer than that, but 10 to 15 minutes, 3 times a week, 4 times a week over 2 years, I mean, it all adds up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you think how easy it is to pick up on bad habits, it's also easy to pick up on good habits, especially if your parents are the ones that are doing these things. Yeah, we've noticed with our right now we have a almost 11 and a 14-year-old. So our worship, ends up being each night we probably spend 30, 40 minutes. But it's because we're reading a chapter of the Bible. We can't do that necessarily with a 5-year-old. And then we're going through some catechism questions. We sing the psalm or song that we're singing for church Sunday. We might stop and talk about it for a minute, and then we let each person pray. And so it's going to be longer. But there are times when it's like, we just, ain't nobody got time for this tonight. So so last night I was like, okay, Amy's sick. I'm tired. It's been a long day. It's the Lord's Day. So I've been busy all day long working with the church. And then I'm like, and it's late, and it's like, okay, I said, tell you what, it's time for bed. Let's just go to bed. Christian's like, are we going to have prayer or something? Are we going to pray? I was like, yes, we are. Come on. So it was good. I was like, okay. So we prayed, and I was glad we did. But it's one of those things where it's like, okay, good. I'm glad you're in the habit of this is what we do, and you aren't just trying to get out of it all the time. Yeah. So they're all habits. And so, all right, well, let me just read this the verse that he starts with, Deuteronomy 31, 11 through 13. And it's from the King James. I'm going to translate on the fly as I can. When all Israel is come to appear before the Lord thy God in the place which he shall choose, you shall read this law before all Israel in their hearing. Gather the people together, men, women, and children, and thy stranger that is within thy gates, that they may hear, and that they may learn and fear the Lord your God, and observe to do all the words of this law, and that their children, which have not known anything, may hear and learn to fear the Lord your God, as long as you live in the land wherever you go over Jordan, whenever you go over to Jordan to possess it. So just, include your children in worship. And he talks about, anytime in the Old Testament when the people are gathered together and there's mention of who all is there, it's families that are gathered, including children, and then some even infants who are suckling on the breast or something like that, as it says. So, so we use that as a biblical mandate to say families should worship together. And so, in our church, and it's evolved over time. We've had lots more families coming with small children, and then, and children are different too. You can have some toddler children who sit, and then some toddler children who they don't sit. And so the compromise we've arrived at our church is we don't have a nursery. We have a parenting room in the back. So if there are parents with very small children and they need to, a woman needs to breastfeed, or you need to take your small child out for changing a diaper or something, we have a room for that. And then we have a little toddler room in the back. So if you need to take your younger child out for a moment, there's a place to kind of let them go out and move around some if they need to. But we also have a time, the song just before the sermon to the end of the worship service. So if we have toddlers, and toddlers being children who are just old enough to toddle, they can get around, walk around a little bit on their own until, when they turn 4 or when they turn 5? I think when they turn 4. that no more toddler nursery for you, no more toddler nursery for you. And so you try to, and encouraging parents that if you are making use of the toddler nursery, and some, it's been helpful to some families to do this, but you're trying to also bring them back into the worship. You keep them in the whole time sometimes so that they start to, I just don't want people to get the children to start thinking, we got children's church and big church. Yeah. And then children's church is fun and we're dancing and we're having games and candy. And then you're making me come in this big boring thing where I have to sit down. And it's like, you can't have that competition. It's like if you have parents that are divorced and you have fun dad and disciplining mom, it doesn't work. So, trying to, I don't want to talk about that too much, but that's just what we've tried to do in our church, is try to have families participate in worship. So as the child grows older, they're just used to it.
I wonder, John, if our church was extremely quiet at Lord's Day worship, I would think something was seriously wrong. Like I would probably feel uneasy about it, but and it is, I'm sure it's very distracting to some people at times, but it's another habit you just learn, man. And once you get used to it, it's children in church. It's wonderful. Yes.
Well, I know I think we've had some older visitors who have come, and some of I think they were bothered maybe by it and didn't come back. Who knows why? But it seems like I could tell. But I'm like, okay, find a church that's just a bunch of old people, and you don't have to worry about children. It's like, come on, why do you not? Yeah, like children. But I think it's one of the things I'm thankful for at our church is we went a long time with no children. And so it was like we had standby nursery, so that if somebody showed up with a baby, we're like, okay, you'll be nursery today, in case somebody showed up. And so now that we finally, and people were worried, hey, we're just going to end up nothing but old people, or we're going to die. And then when you start to have children and you have younger children, that the older people in the congregation are excited by the fact that they're there. And then people will tell me a lot. It's like, I'm sorry, my child was disruptive. And I'm like, I can't hear it where I am. So it's fortunate for me. I hear it sometimes. I mean, there's a couple kids, and I always want to look up. I was like, is that Bear? Is that Abigail? Who is that?
It's one of the two.
But I don't want to look. Well, there's other children too. Yeah. And that's Tallulah. I think maybe but I can't tell because I don't want to look up and go back there and look, because I think the parents might think I'm chastising their child. We've now distracted the pastor. Oh man, I used to be terrible. Anything. Somebody got up and walked out. Somebody sneezed. Somebody scratched their head. I was like, I'd almost have to comment on it. I was so distracted by it. Yeah. So I've learned over the years just to let things just kind of go.
You do a great job preaching through it, because it can get loud in there.
Sometimes I don't notice it.
It can get loud. When do you think the practice of segregating our children during worship started? Do you have any idea?
No, I don't. But I think it's like most things, it's probably 70s. I bet you. Yeah. I bet you by then they started, because a lot of the seeker sensitive things, and then the 80s started kicking in. And I wouldn't be surprised if it were more like that, just because. And I don't think it was because we need to have the adults free of distraction. It was probably because we need to offer something for the children, because that's what youth groups, all that stuff started. And I'm like, youth groups, I was a youth pastor, a youth leader for years, and did that work. And it was like, I don't know. It's just, I look back at it and I'm like, was it helpful? Was that? And if you interviewed people, they've done this. They've said, people that have stayed in the church for, after college, and they'll interview them and say, who had the greatest impact on your staying in church? It's the number one person is never the pastor or youth leader. It's always their parents. Mm-hmm. And so youth leaders can make up for some of the lack. But I think that what ends up happening is you have two churches under one roof. So you end up with, come, let's do our fun stuff. And then how do you, anyway, and sometimes, but I don't know. I think it was just because they were concerned that the young children were going to leave, and probably some other churches started doing more high impact aerobic type workouts where they were like, let's go do this. but yeah, and we did it, and I mean, it's you, and what you're doing is you're trying to do what you think is right. You're trying to do what you think is best. And then you start to look at it and think about it and see people that want to. It's been very helpful to have families that want to have their children in the worship service, because when you have families who kind of want to not have their children in the worship service and you're telling them you need to keep them in here, there's a rebellion type thing against it, and they don't get it. So that's what's been helpful to us, is that some people have come where they're like you guys, I want my children to be in the worship service, and it's like, awesome. That's what we've been trying to. And then what I've heard from a couple parents, maybe it is that as they've looked back, one person told me, he says, I realize I've been selfish when I was letting my children go off to a children's church or something, because they were distracting me. And what I should have been doing is focusing on them rather than focusing on me. So at least for that person, he felt like the purpose of all this removing them was so that they wouldn't be, and that is a lot of it too, so that you don't distract the parents from the worship service. Mm-hmm. But what it means is you're just, so you don't care about the kids. It's like, oh, well, we'll do something for them too. But yeah, there's a lengthy answer that says, I don't know.
No. Yeah. I mean, it's a real thing. I mean, I had a physician tell me the other day the reason she wasn't, no longer going to a specific church or whatever is because she couldn't handle her kids, and like she didn't have anywhere to send her kids. And I told her exactly what we're talking about right now. You should never have to send your kids away from you in church. Yeah, it'll be hard, but do it. And what look at our church. I mean, our church is growing, and a lot of it's growing one baby at a time. We got baby showers constantly. Kids are in worship, and it's a beautiful thing. I mean, it really is.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think the people that come and see it start to, I don't know, I think there's probably a family or two that decided to go somewhere else because we didn't have a nursery or we didn't have or something. But I think if you give it a chance, give it a shot, and even having other families, like trying to help you see somebody struggling and somebody else is like, let me help you with this. But I think they've also been trained to think, if we make noise in the worship service, then people are going to get mad at us. So, so we've covered a lot of this stuff in this part of the book already, but let's just, he says, this is on page 296 at the bottom of the first full paragraph. Do our churches care for these tender and impressionable souls that God has entrusted to us? And so he's talking about, our own children in the neighborhood and things like this. And I think even the worst church cares for the children. I mean, even churches that are nothing more than synagogues of Satan, I think, are trying to, in their diluted way, they're trying to care for their children. So it's not, do we care for our children, but what's the wise biblical way to care for our children at church? And so, that's what we've been sort of, and so really COVID changed a lot of things for us, and we stopped Sunday school during COVID, and then we don't have Sunday school now, and there's nothing wrong with Sunday school, but we found for us that being able to come to church and worship rather than going to a Sunday school class and everybody getting distracted and people coming in late and people, then that it's just been better to reason you're coming to churches for worship, and then encouraging parents to be doing family worship together. And then on Wednesday nights, having little classes so that, and at first I thought, well, maybe we shouldn't even do Wednesday nights like this because parents should be taking care of the education of their children. But you don't have that unless you homeschool and you incorporate, and I think homeschoolers should incorporate Bible curriculum and Bible study into their homes because you can. Why would you not? But also learning together in a group is a good thing too. And so having Bible study on Wednesday nights and then sending home some things for parents to review and things like that has been helpful. And some churches have a worship service, and after the worship service, they have a Sunday school class. And that maybe that'd be something we do in the future. But right now, it just seems like the best thing is you're coming to worship together and you're doing family worship, and we have an evening worship. We're trying to involve the kids with this too. And then Wednesday nights is a good time because fellowship, children need this fellowship too,
Yeah.
where you get to know each other. There's getting to know each other. I mean, there's ways to do it at church. I don't get distracted, but I mean, you can have meals after church every so often or every Sunday so that people just hang out together and do life together after church for a while. And that could be something that can be done too, but there's all these ways to do it. All right, so he starts on practical guidelines for ministry to children in the church on page 297, and he just starts off. He says, how should churches minister to children in their midst? So how do we do it? One, he says, include the children. So we've talked about that, as he says, a gathering of the household of faith. And so I think that's important that you actually realize that, we're the church gathered together. Are the children a part of the church? And I don't care whether you baptize your children or not. You should recognize the fact that they're, in some ways, members of the church. They're members of your family. Your family's a part of the church, so the children are a part of the church. And so you should engage them. And he just uses examples in the Old Testament where during feast and times of worship, he quotes this guy, Jeremy Walker, and he says, the constant presumption of Scripture is the children were present in the worship of the people of God. And so I think that's important. Given this scriptural evidence, he says, of the above, churches should not separate children, teenagers, or adults into different worship assemblies. So he's not talking about like a Wednesday night or a Sunday school program where and some churches do that. They put everybody into one class. And I don't think that's wise because there's different levels of learning and ways you teach different age groups and things. But if you're gathered for worship, if you have a prayer meeting, if you have Sunday night worship, morning worship, everybody should be there. You don't have a separate worship service for different age of children. And feel free to jump in and comment or anything, because I'm just going to kind of go through as I see things.
Well, John, hey, I will say one thing about that in the gathering. So in your morning worship, evening worship, prayer, whatever. I don't think I've actually told Nathan this, but something we did pretty early on, just watching how Hudson was behaving during service when they first started coming, is we kind of positioned ourselves behind them for a season so that Judah could see other kids sitting there. So what they're doing. Yeah.
Hey, I would say it's one of the things is like somebody started this habit of holding your hands out to receive the benediction at the end. I mean, It's not just our church; there's other churches that do it. But I never said hey or tried to model it. It's just like people just started doing it because somebody anyway. So children see that. And so a lot of the smallest children hold their hands out because that's what everybody else is doing. I'm like, this is awesome. I'm so glad we do that because it's a participative.
Judah literally did it tonight after family worship.
He held his hands out.
Yeah, and said what you always say. So it's supposed to, we just usually stop with the doxology, but now he has to go on to
bless the family.
May the Lord bless you and keep you every night in his hands. But it's wonderful.
Yeah.
But that was helpful for us, I think. I think it was helpful for him. To appreciate yourself and let your kids see and experience and try to acquire some of those habits.
Well, yeah, and when other families come in and they see other families and they see children staying in worship, it's encouraging to them that I can do it too. Of course they might think, my kid's a lot worse than theirs. They can never do this, but everybody thinks their kids are the most disruptive in the church. He just talks about including the children in it. Involve the children. Number 2, involve the children in the whole life of the church. He talks about noting their talent. And I think this is something we've tried to do, and it's probably better to do as you can. You just see opportunities is like help, if somebody wants to help hand out a bulletin, like Christian will go back there sometimes and help Glenn hand out bulletins, and it's like, okay. And then but if somebody can sing or whatever talent, anything they can do to help help clean, help do just where they feel like we're actually involved in the work of the church, is a good thing. 3 is it talks about, it says you can recruit children to stuff envelopes for mailings, to make cards for sick people, to visit nursing homes, do things like this. 3, talk to the children, greet them when they come in, treat the assembly of a church as a sacred family reunion. He said, talk to them about the sermon. I asked my children about the sermon after, just like, what was the sermon about today? Christians always, I wrote down something. They want to go grab their notes.
Let me read it for you.
Yeah, because I mean, if you ask me too long after a sermon, even though I've been working all week, I might take a minute to think about what was it about. But one of the things I like to do better, because I think 3 is the last thing, which just says talk to them. Well, let me do this thing. 4 is love the children, and I think that's it. I've had parents who are like, how do I discipline my child? How do I, I think a lot of parents are afraid their child won't know if they love them or not. They'll think I don't love them if I punish them. And I'm like, well, I think if you love your child, the child will know you love them. Actually love your child. That'll help your child to know. Excuse me. So I think with people in the church, you can tell the children pick up very easily whether they're cared for or not. Or am I in the way, or do people like seeing me come? So when I see my grandson Bear, it's like, oh, there's Bear. So I'm kind of like, okay, I need to make sure I greet other children like I do Bear, because they don't understand, like, that one's my grandson. So Bear actually doesn't, like, I'm Papa John. That was my daddy. So somehow I ended up being Papa John. And so the other kids call me Pastor John. So Bear is hearing Papa John, Pastor, so he calls me Paste John, which is the Haitians call this Paste. That's how they say. So I'm like, he's saying the Haitian Paste John. Yeah. But yeah, so I think it's important for adults in appropriate ways to get down there with them and say, hey, know their names, speak to them, ask them about how their day went. Hey, I like nice shoes. Man, you talk about the shoes, and all of a sudden everybody's feet come out. Look at my shoes.
Yeah.
So and I don't, anyway. You shouldn't compliment them. Go on and on about their looks all the time, but the fact that they're there and stuff like that. So, but with sermons, like what I've tried to do in prayers is like try to specifically speak to children or try to pray specifically for children. But it is hard to do because you get caught up into a sermon, and then you can forget that you are trying to also communicate small children. And so it's like, sometimes I'll remember and I'll do, if I catch a child's eye, all of a sudden I'll be like, okay, what we mean by this. So I think that's something that the more parents involve children in a worship service, the more the pastor is going to feel, hopefully, inclined to think, how do I communicate to small children? And some churches do a little children's sermon at the beginning. And I've had people that want me to do a little children's sermon at the beginning. And I just think it takes too much time. I think it's too distracting. And I think and most people will tell you, I got more out of the children's sermon than I did your regular sermon. They want to add that second part, but they'll say, I always get, and I'm like, okay, what that means is I need to be communicating all the time more like it's a children's sermon, and actually, but people want to look at the kids and see the children and how cute they are and stuff. But I think, have to be careful, making too much of our children at times too, and letting them get on display up there. But my point is that rather than just relegating it to a children's message, the sermon should be like, parts of it at least should be able to be grasped by a child if you can. That's hard to do though, man.
Well, I think I can imagine it is, but I think we also don't give these kids enough credit sometimes. They comprehend more than we think.
Mm-hmm.
They may not, and they'll do this. They may not be able to recommunicate it to you when you get in the car to leave, but it'll come up 3 months later.
Mm-hmm.
It's getting in there.
I'll tell you the things. So what they'll pick up on is the one thing that you didn't mean to have come out of your mouth. And we had a children's sermon, and we're talking about something about a fight. Somebody said something about a fight, and I said a fight is. What did I say? I said a fight is just 2 hits, me hitting you and you hitting the floor. And then I went on with it. And this one kid, I was like, he just remembered that for forever. It's the fights. My pastor told me a fight's him hitting me and me hitting the floor, not me or something. I don't know. I was like, okay, a fight's 2 hits. So they do listen.
They do. They do.
And they hear. And that's the point of bringing people into worship is, how much do we get? There's so much depth to what's being, not even, I mean, things that, not just because, hey, listen how deep the sermon is, but the message is, there's, the Holy Spirit does so much more. There's so much more depth than any of us are aware of, that we don't get it. We just all are scratching the surface at what God has, placed before us. And even understanding the Lord's Supper, it's like, how old does a child have to be to understand what's happening? And it's like, how much do we understand what's happening? I'm even, the main thing for our church is, do you understand the gospel in some way? Are you able to articulate, what it is that you believe? Do you know what it means when we say the body and blood of Christ? This is the cup, sin, salvation. Do you kind of get the pictures? Because they're a means of grace. And if the Lord's Supper is a means of grace, then you want to bring it. And I think what I've noticed is homeschooling parents who incorporate family worship into their worship, their children, I think, are ready for the Lord's Supper earlier than a child who is not. Gosh, I hate to be judgmental about these things, but if you're not spending a whole lot of time gospeling your children at home, then it's going to take longer for them to grasp certain things. And I think that's something that we have to kind of come to terms with. So if you have your children in public school, fine, but make sure you are making efforts to supplement that with more worship than you would have to do if you're just, it would naturally happen during the day but a lot of people homeschooling don't think about it. I've had homeschool parents that's like, you don't even use any Bible curriculum in your homeschool. I mean, I was like, how do you not do this? So don't give up on the children. Sometimes Christian parents become discouraged about their children. And he just says, don't give up. Let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not. And he's just talking about means of grace as parents. I mean, the fact that, are you guaranteed that your children are going to grow up to have faith and to be saved and go to heaven? And that's a big thing. And people want to be able to say, yes, I know they will. But it's just, you're not saved just by being born in a Christian home. But being born in a Christian home is a mighty powerful providence. And if becoming a member, being baptized, being prayed with, prayed for, prayed over, being brought to church, I mean, that's not nothing. That's a huge, it's a big differentiation between the world and your children. So the fact that God has placed these human beings under your care and you're praying for them is an indication that God is lavishing grace on them. And so we pray, for that to bear fruit. And he talks about telling God to remember his promises, but I'm not sure. It seems that, and I think the promise is that his word does not return void, that our efforts at these things are not wasted. He says, remember when you were a child, did not God hear the prayers of your parents and your pastors for your spiritual well-being? And I thought about that, and I thought, my grandparents prayed. They modeled a lot of this. I had grandparents that prayed a lot, and I had my grandmother and my grandfather died before I was born, but my grandmother loved me, prayed for me, and all this stuff. So, I always talk about them having this influence and these prayers that my grandparents prayed for me. And but I didn't think about it. There were pastors that was in their churches, and they were probably praying for me, and Sunday school teachers and aunts and uncles and parents. There's tons of people praying for me that I never, didn't necessarily sit down at their knees and hear them reading the Bible and praying. But, just how much we should be thankful for people in our lives that we're completely unaware of. That I'm just amazed. Being a pastor, you get to hear more things sometimes. But just church members that you don't talk too much, you just kind of say hello to, and you like them, but you don't have a close relationship outside of church, really. And and you realize they've been praying for you. I pray for you every day, and they do. And I'm like, well, I need to, as I do you. We need to be. So anyway, it's just the things that God does behind the scenes are quite remarkable. So I think our children are blessed, definitely, to be in Christian homes in a Christian church. So why would you not involve them in the worship of the church?
Amen.
Blah, blah, blah. Not that I said bad things. I'm just like, okay, I can ramble. So what are your closing thoughts on the Parenting by God's Promise? Not necessarily the book, just the whole.
Well, I mean, there's seasons for everything, I guess. So, you know, don't give up on them. Don't give up on, I guess we could call this a process, this family oriented parenting by God's promises, getting our kids in worship. Yeah, it's really hard, and it's how God created it. We go through these seasons, it'll be really hard, and then it'll get really good. And most of all, it's extremely worth it when you start seeing the fruit. So it's got to keep going, keep staying at it, and the Lord is true to his promises.
Well, and he says they have souls. They're going to last forever. They're going to spend eternity somewhere. And these are souls that you love more than yourself. And so, why would you not make every effort? And don't farm it out to other people.
Right.
That's
it's your responsibility.
Right. Yeah. So, all right. Well, cool. Well, thank you very much. Sorry, Christian couldn't be with us tonight, and we'll figure out between now and then when we're going to do the next thing. We will figure it out before we do it. And but J.C. Riles,
it's going to be good.
What's that? Thoughts for
young men.
Thoughts for young men. Yeah, I read the whole thing. It's on an audiobook. You can get it pretty cheap, and it's like $5. You can get it the cheapest I saw for it on Amazon. Saw it for on Amazon, and so I think it'll be profitable.
Thanks. So.
All right, then.
Well, thank you,
sir. Hope you feel better, and your children.
Thank you, Pastor. Appreciate that.
And see you Sunday, I guess.
Sunday. Yeah. Work Wednesday. See you Sunday. Best